Hi, everybody, and welcome to this edition of Fruit for Thought. I'm James Mathison. I'm your host today, and I'm one of the lead facilitators here at the Oranges Toolkit. Joining us today, we're going to be speaking with Bev Aisbett. Now, Bev is a mental health expert, highly regarded in her field. Not only is she a talented counsellor, but she's also an accomplished author and also an illustrator and painter. And a lot of her work encompasses the merging of both her written work and also the artwork that she does. She's the author of 19 books, so she's always very busy with her writing and her painting. And some of those books encompass things that are very close to our heart when we talk about well-being and workplace well-being, things such as dealing with panic attacks, depression, anxiety, stress-related disorders. And her most recent book is on burnout, something that we here at the Oranges Toolkit offer workshops on ourselves. It is the big book of burnout, what happens, why it happens, what it is, and how to stop it before it stops you. Bev joins us now. Thanks so much for your time and making space for us, Bev.
Thanks very much, James. Nice to be here.
So let's talk about burnout. You wrote this book, but at the same time, you weren't yourself immune from burnout, and the synergy of writing something that was so personally connected must have been quite a challenge.
All of my books are written from lived experience, and unfortunately I took this one a bit too far. I started the book and then spontaneously decided to open an art gallery at the same time, which was kind of dumb, really, in terms of the amount of effort that was required to do both. So consequently, for the first time in 30 years, and all those books, I actually had to ask for an extension on the deadline because I really was going into burnout trying to get this book done.
And so what was the catalyst beyond that? When did you realise that this was something that you needed to speak about and needed to help people guide themselves through?
Well, I think particularly in this current climate, people are really pushing hard. You know, there's a lot of fear and uncertainty about the future. There's a lot invested in putting all my eggs in one basket now in case something happens. Going through COVID really threw everyone for a loop. And I think most people have taken on more than they can handle, which I would say is the bottom line definition of burnout, is where your well-being is put aside for the sake of some quest or goal or achievement that you think is important. And, you know, as a result, everything is in jeopardy. Your health, your emotional well-being, even your job satisfaction goes out the window for a start. So there's some big questions that need to be asked when you get to that level.
And can you tell us how people sort of differentiate between just feeling overwhelmed or exhausted or overworked and start to head down that path of actual burnout? What does it look like for people?
Well, I think the first two that you've outlined are telling you that you're already in burnout. If you're overwhelmed and exhausted, you know, what's left. But I think the things that you might start noticing is a change in temperament for a start, that you might be more irritable, you're more reactive to people, you're triggered by even fairly inane comments. You're not sleeping well, you're not eating right, you find that you're stressed all of the time. So, I mean, burnout, it's a difficult one to quantify. It really is essentially up to the person to recognise that things have gone too far. Unfortunately, they tend to do it too late. And so they've already undermined their ability to function in a lot of ways. But, you know, to speak personally, there was a couple of times when I just burst into tears when I was trying to set up an exhibition at this gallery, and, you know, the frames hadn't arrived on time and I couldn't get them up in time for the opening, and it was like do or die. And I just went into complete meltdown. I mean, that's not normal. That's not okay. So if you find that you're very reactive to things around you that normally wouldn't bother you so much, time to have a reassessment of the situation.
Yeah, when you talked about bursting into tears, I was in session a couple of weeks ago and a woman who hadn't noticed it in herself, got a bit of feedback from her husband, who noticed that when she'd get home from work, often she would be in tears. And so she expressed the fact that she had this blind spot. She didn't realize, because it had been so slow, the sort of descent into burnout, it had been other people who had clocked the signs.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Actually, one of the things to notice is people starting to walk on eggshells around you. They're finding your work relationships getting pretty strained. That's probably a good sign that things aren't right with you. May not be anything to do with your work or others, but, the tension that you're radiating, like a sort of irradiated force field. We all know that someone walks into a room, you can feel the vibe straight away. So just be aware of how people are responding to you.
One of the parts of the subtitle to your book is "Who Gets It? Who Gets Burnout?" And I imagine, from learning a little bit about your story, trying to open a gallery while writing a book after already written, almost 20 books, you might have a particular personality type that might be more susceptible. But talk to us about that idea. Who does get burnout?
Who, me? Little old relaxed me. Type A, here I am, owning up to that. Type A is the kind of personality they find it very hard to relax. In fact, relaxation, asking a type A to relax is the equivalent of asking them to, stick a hot coal up their nose or something. It's just a foreign concept to a type A. They've got to be active, they've got to be involved, they've got to be doing something. Everything is a project. So type A is described as driven, restless, high achieving, competitive. They're great workers because they give it their all, but they're very hard on themselves as a result. You can't really get a type A to change their spots. That's just how they're going to be. But there are ways to for a type A to learn to adapt to a different way of being, which might even be, to make everything a project, which they do, is how relaxed can I be this week? How laid back can I be about this? What can I prioritise here? And to do it very systematically, so it becomes something that fits within their mindset, and something that they can apply themselves to that's actually helpful to them, rather than constantly with the foot on the accelerator, which is very typical. It's also very typical for people of type A personality to fit into the anxiety mold, and very prone to anxiety. So there's a lot of overthinking, a lot of predictive thinking, which is, what if, and usually sort of worst case scenarios are at the foreground of their what if questions, rather than possibly good outcomes. Just even shifting the thinking around, what if I'm sort of laid back about this and it actually all works out okay? What if I do the best I can without pushing myself and I still achieve what I set out to do? That's an example of changing that kind of thinking.
So we know type A
Apologies for the
personalities.
voice, it's going.
That's all right. Are quite susceptible. There are certain industries as well that are more susceptible. I know people who sort of gravitate to perhaps caregiving spaces can be susceptible because they put so much of themselves into what they do.
Yeah, I did a whole section in the book on the role of a carer, which is not necessarily a vocation that someone chooses. They might find themselves in that situation. But yeah, often people who are in a caretaking capacity are very compassionate, kind people, but they don't always look after their own needs. And, the equivalent to that is, the instructions you get from when you go on a plane is essentially that if you are a mother and you have a child, or a parent and you have a child, you use the oxygen mask first, because you're not going to be able to help the child if you're out of oxygen. So the same sort of applies to anyone who's in that sort of caring capacity. You're not going to be of much help to anyone if you're completely exhausted in the process. No matter how kind-hearted you are, you're not doing anyone else a favour if you push yourself too far. But obviously there are professions that are really high stress just by nature. Take a surgeon, for example, or a nursing during COVID, my goodness, or doctors, or any of the emergency service staff. So the question there is, are they all going to collapse from burnout? No, they're not. Some people aren't. You know, is a surgeon going to fall apart because he's doing a 12-hour surgery? So what's the difference there? And if you wouldn't mind, I'd just sort of like to outline a few of those. I guess it's all about how you approach the situation, really. And you can push yourself to the limit, or you can work within the means that you have. And I think those who do well in this regard are those who have a very balanced approach to it. They give their all to their job, but they also section out their life to incorporate adequate caretaking aspects. And that would include spending quality time with friends or family, enjoying downtime, eating right, getting enough sleep. So it balances out the high intensity. But it's very much an approach. Is it a do or die? I mean, being an author, I'm used to deadlines, and you can be very obedient to a deadline and kind of kill yourself in the process. But I've done a cartoon on this, which is the author and her muse trying to get the job done in time for the deadline, staying up all night because the ideas haven't flowed. And then finally, you know, having coffee all night and staying up and they're ragged and exhausted, sending it off, only to receive an out of office reply, I'll be back in a week, I'm on holidays, or I'm on sick leave. So, you know, it's amazing how flexible these things can be when need be. I'm not saying ignore the timeline, but do it within your means. And ask for an extension if you need to. Ask for the help if you need to. Type A's are also notorious for not asking for the help that they need. They like to see themselves being able to, you know, be competent in everything they do. So asking for help seems like a weakness, but it's not. You know, if you're struggling, then ask. Someone can say yes, someone can say no.
What are some of those barriers for a lot of people, rather than just type A personalities, when we're in a workplace or we're in an office environment? What are some of the things internally that stop us from actually saying, hey, I need help here? And how can we try and cultivate the ability to be better at that?
I think there's a lot of fear around job vulnerability at this time. So you don't want to see yourself as a troublemaker by making demands. But essentially you might find that actually there's a lot of leeway to be had with that. Someone may, you know, your boss, your manager, or your, you know, colleagues may not really have any idea of how much you're struggling. If you're used to doing it all by yourself without reaching out, that's going to be expected of you. And the same goes in the private sector as well. You know, you'll see people martyr themselves, particularly this time of year, Christmas. There's poor old mum, and she's up at dawn and she's cooking the dinner for 20 people and, you know, falls face first into the Christmas pud out of exhaustion. But the thing is, she hasn't asked for help, and people are used to her taking on the role entirely. So, you know, whose responsibility is it?
Yeah, and we talk about that in a workplace as well. Like, often people feel like the burden is always on themselves to be able to keep up with the deadlines, with the workloads. And I guess you sort of point to that idea, it's a balance. You know, we need to have employers come to the table, understanding them, but we also need employees to communicate when it is too much.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. The power of the word no too, you know. If there are unreasonable demands, are you pointing out that they're unreasonable for you? Or are you just doing that overtime because you're afraid that if you don't, you might be seen as incompetent or whatever else? I think in the end, we need to take a big picture look at why we do anything. Why are we doing this job? And, you know, are you still loving what you do? And if you're not, why are you doing it? And if you're not, how can you change it so you do start to enjoy it again? What is it that's causing you the stress and the overwhelm in the first place? This book started out with a fairly small idea. It seemed quite obvious that burnout meant, you know, you're exhausted and tired all the time. But as I wrote it, it grew tentacles. It was much more about a lifestyle, about an approach to the things that you enjoy. It's possible to be burnt out doing a sport that you love. So what's that mean? You've taken it too far. And then on and on. It actually is quite a philosophical issue in the end. But it is about asking those questions. Why am I doing this? How far am I going to push myself before I say it's too much? And how will I know when I've achieved this goal that I'm after? And will I be well enough to enjoy it when I actually get there? So, there is only now, really, that's important. And the future is always and as always has been uncertain. So if you get to a future that throws you for a loop and you've spent all this time worrying about it, where was your quality of life?
It's really pertinent, and that's kind of why we wanted to speak to you this time of year, early December, mid-December, as we head into the holiday season, because there is this idea of end of year burnout. Like, people have clocked maybe a few weeks ago, maybe a few months ago, that they've hit the wall, but they've just convinced themselves that they just need to get to the end of the year and limp over the line. But I'm interested in that idea of, like, what does that even mean? If you limp over the line and you get to your holidays and you get there and you're absolutely cooked, then what sort of quality can you bring to your actual holiday, to the time you're going to spend with your family? Can you talk a little bit about that? Sometimes we set these benchmarks that are in the future, that we just need to get over this hill, but sometimes that can be quite harmful.
Yeah. I mean, in that context, is it a holiday or is it recovery? It's almost like you're going to be spending that time, which should be enjoyable, trying to recover physically, emotionally, and mentally. So you're not really able to participate in the thing that you've worked so hard to achieve. So, look, we all get caught up in the end of year stuff, the deadlines galore, to do with Christmas. I've got to get that posted, I've got to get that board, I've got to, round out this project, I've got to have those meetings. I think we just need to get a bit real about it's one day of the year, and a couple of weeks off, or a week off at the most. And how does that fit in with the enjoyment that you're supposed to be having as a result of all this hard time that you've put in? So again, it's what's good for me, really, because you are all you've got, and if you're not looking after you, then nothing really is worth it.
It's also probably a reframing for a lot of people of how they look at holidays and maybe weekends, rather than just getting to the weekend and trying to get over the week, or getting to the holidays and getting over the year. It's becoming more proactive in how they look after themselves and take care of their own well-being.
Yeah, I think unfortunately in most cases there's not a lot of personal responsibility. We can blame burnout, we can blame our job, we can blame the government, we can blame whatever for the circumstances that we find ourselves in. We're actually, we have put ourselves there. You took that job by choice, so why don't you make the best of it? I'll go back to that point again. Are you loving it? Then why are you doing it? So I think that's a really good barometer for how well you're travelling in general. Am I liking where I find myself? And if I'm not, then what can I change, rather than expecting outside factors to change that for me?
And so maybe people who find that concept of, like, it's my responsibility, a little bit too intense to deal with initially, maybe it's more just starting to think about, there are things that I can control here, and starting to think about what they are and what I can do about them.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you can control how you think about something. Mindfulness is one aspect where you're not so much entrenched in what's coming at you as you're absorbing yourself in what's coming at you. So an example of that would be that you give your full attention to what you're doing in this moment, rather than projecting forward to the whole to-do list that's awaiting you after that. So that means really noticing what you're feeling, thinking, sensing with your all five senses. A very simple way to do that is to do the dishes, like, what do I smell? What do I feel? What am I seeing? What am I hearing? I wouldn't recommend tasting if you're doing the dishes, but it's bringing your full attention to the thing that you're working on in the moment, rather than worrying around the whole list that you might have to do afterwards, because that takes the stress out of it, and it places it, you move on to the next thing. So it's one thing at a time in this moment. I think for me, going through very severe anxieties I did, one of the lifesavers was the wonderful magic of list making, and just quietly working off that list. And that might include not just job related things, but what can I do for myself today? How can I make this about work, rest and play, and put that on the list? half an hour in the park at lunchtime, just staring out of the window for a little while, just taking a break. Maybe do a little meditation, whatever it is, it just makes it flow much more easily.
Yeah, so finding things that work for you with your environment and the time commitments you have, just to make sure you nurture yourself and fill up your cup, I guess.
I think that experience was a bit of a wake-up call for me that, I'll proudly say I'm 71 now. Thank you for saying I don't look it.
Not a day.
Thank you. But, the body, the mind is still a 30-year-old's, but the body is not, and that's the reality of the situation. And as much as I love my work, and my work is very much a satisfying thing to me, I need to slow down. And it's come to that. And, there might have been, when I was approaching that burnout situation, a denial of that, or a refusal to accommodate that reality, because that would be an admission that maybe I couldn't go on the way I was. But I'm not going to go on the way I was, because it wasn't very good for me and I wasn't enjoying it. And they were two things that I really loved doing, the gallery and the book, but it was either them or me. So I chose the book with an extension. The gallery had to go.
Can we talk very quickly about this idea of saying no? I mean, when we asked for people to share some questions with you online, a lot of them were around excessive workload and stress in the workplace. And you mentioned towards the start the power of saying no. Can you talk a little bit about how people can cultivate more of that, or maybe get over the fear that they might have, the apprehension to start having that in their vocabulary, and what can be on the other side of that?
I'll give you an example that's not in the workplace, but it might speak to people, of one of my gurus, if you like, a very advanced human being who was the picture of peace and grace and love and all that sort of thing. I could never see her becoming angry. And she had to go to a seminar in Paris. This was back before mobile phones, and was being billeted at a place that she had to call before 9 p.m. to be able to get into the building. Otherwise, she'd be locked out. And there was a woman in the phone box who just would not stop talking. And, my friend kept knocking on the door, please, I need to make this phone call. And this very French, that arrogant woman kept waving her away. And in the end, she said she just opened the door, took the phone and hung it up. And I went, I cannot imagine you doing something so aggressive. She said, I didn't do it with anger. And I think the point that she was making is the difference between being quietly assertive and asking for, or, asserting for what you need because it's good for you. And it will probably be good for your colleague or your boss as well, that you're working at your best. So there's a difference between coming in with resentment or expecting rejection or any of those things. You're just saying, you're asserting your needs, to saying what's right for you. And someone can agree or not. And if that's the situation, then you can have a discussion about it. It doesn't mean do or die to bring these things to the table.
And is it fair to say when people practice that a little bit more, not only do they get better at saying no, if they're in a workplace, they can start to foster an environment where that becomes normalized?
Yes. And I mean, that would be very helpful if managers or, there were meetings around that, to share if someone needs some support or there's something that they want to hear in a safe environment. So they get good at, saying, well, this is what I need at this time.
Yeah, that's great. All right, well, we're almost out of time, Bev. We don't want to keep you too long. But just as a little recap there, the idea of, owning your no, doing things that fill up your own cup, trying to spot the signs for yourself are all important. But before we leave you, what's the kind of one or two short, small go-to things that you try and maintain in your life now to make sure that, you don't head down that burnout path again?
I think it's just sort of monitoring how well I'm working my way through the day. If I'm feeling rushed, if I'm feeling pulled in a lot of different directions, that's fine. It's sort of a signal that I'm not in my centre. I think it comes down to just that feeling of, am I in my centre here, or are there things pulling me outside of myself? So it's just sort of coming back to that. How can I feel myself relaxing more? Can I pace this and actually enjoy it rather than feeling like I'm being pushed? And what can I get rid of today? You know, what's not really crucial on the to-do list? Maybe a shorter dog walk will mean that I get that job done. You know, just those little things can really add up about getting through the day with much more ease. And it's not do or die, you know, this is life. It goes up and down. Just to learn to go with the ride rather than being overwhelmed by it.
Beautiful. All right. Thank you for your time today, Bev. Your book, The Book of Burnout, is out now, and you're feeling you might want to explore that a little bit more. There it is there. You can pick that up. Or maybe give it to someone as a Christmas present if you're feeling that they're teetering on the edge. Enjoy your break, Bev, and thanks for your time today on Fruit for Thought.
And Merry Christmas to everyone. And may it be a nice, relaxed one.
Amen. Thanks for joining us, everyone, and we appreciate your time. We'll see you next time on the webinar.